Hello, everybody. Well, now I know because our dear ASL interpreter is signing. So now I know I'm actually being heard. Rabbi, could you shake your head if you can hear me? Perfect. Thank you. I want to welcome all of you to the Hebrew Seminary Summer Spirituality Series. That's a tongue twister. Finding inspiration from the wisdom of Jewish spiritual masters. Reflecting on questions we face these days, and they are certainly being asked, our esteemed Hebrew Seminary faculty, and our alum will provide an opportunity to weave age-old wisdom into our lives today. Since our founding in 1992 in Skokie, Illinois, Hebrew Seminary has been an inclusive and egalitarian community, teaching our students to become rabbis and Jewish educators to serve all Jewish communities, including the deaf community. We offer a scholarly education that empowers our students to become leaders and spiritual guides, as well as providing learning opportunities for all communities. We want to give a special hello to our extraordinary founder and president, Rabbi Dr. Douglas Goldhammer, who always inspires us with his wisdom and his generosity of spirit. For those of you who are familiar with the seminary, we thank you for being with us and for being a part of our community. And for those of you who are new to the seminary, we are thrilled you're here. And while these extraordinary, and they are extraordinary times, are causing great havoc in our world, we're grateful to have the opportunity to reach an audience beyond the walls of the seminary. I'm Nancy Rothstein, a member of the board, and I'll be moderating the second of our series this evening, Quarantales, Personal Lessons of Growth in These Extraordinary, Difficult, and Miraculous Times, with Rabbi Michael Davis. But before I introduce our speaker, a few Zoom guidelines to enrich your experience tonight. The chat room at the bottom of your screen is open for your comments. And please put your questions in the Q&A feature also at the bottom of your screen. We'll be getting to those a bit later. To ensure that all of you can hear Rabbi Davis, your mics are muted. And I also want to introduce our ASL interpreter, Paula Blumberg, who will be signing this evening. Thank you, Paula. And for those following Paula, a couple of helpful things, I hope. There is a gallery view rather than the speaker view, which you can find in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. In addition, you may choose to pin, as in P-I-N, Rabbi Paula's video by clicking on the three dots on the upper right corner of the image, of her image, and select Pin Video to make it larger. And note that anyone can do this on the speaker's view, for example, as well. Now, our esteemed faculty member, Rabbi Michael Davis. He's a graduate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in musicology. He received his cantorial investiture from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion School of Sacred Music. We could all use some sacred music, couldn't we? And his rabbinic ordination from Hebrew Seminary. He has served as clergy in synagogues in the Chicago area for over 25 years and has been teaching at the seminary for over a decade. Currently, he works with the largest Jewish community, unaffiliated Jews, performing weddings, funerals, and other rituals. We are so fortunate to have Rabbi Davis with us this evening. Amidst this ongoing pandemic and the myriad challenges and hardships it presents, Rabbi Davis will enlighten us with glimmers into the strange, yet even sometimes wonderful things that are taking place in our very midst, both within us and around us. And he welcomes your stories as we are all in this together, finding hope and keeping faith. Without further ado, Rabbi Davis, please make sure you are unmuted.
Hi, everybody. So let's begin with some sacred music with 3 words from the book of Psalms, from Psalm 89. Feel free to join in. You can sing as loud as you like. Who's going to know? So please let your voices sing out and sing with me this affirmation or aspiration. And we'll have that first slide come up so you can see the words. Olam chesed yibane, lai 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 lai, ya lai lai lai. Olam chesed yibane, ya lai 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 lai, ya lai lai lai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Olam chesed yibane, ya dai 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 dai, ya dai dai dai. Take the slide down. Thank you. I want to say welcome to everybody. I'm so honored to see so many friends, fellow teachers, people I've taught, and really glad to see you and to share with you and to learn with you this evening. You may have noticed in the slide, I offered two translations, both of which are actually biblically wrong for the scholars among you. The biblical meaning of the word is a world we will create with kindness. But I took some rabbinic license that once the words are taken out of biblical context, it's quite traditional for the rabbis to frame it in their own way. And as you saw, you can read these words as an affirmation. A world of love will be built. And if you can say that, say that. But sometimes we can't affirm that. And then the words are a signpost, an aspiration. May a world of love be built. And both are legitimate translations of the Hebrew responding to whatever is in our heart. We are so isolated from each other. It's wonderful to connect in this forum, but the very forum itself points to our isolation, that we are not able to be in the same space right now. And we all carry that weight in different ways. I know of some of the people here today and others who haven't been out of their homes literally for months. We feel the burden of not being able to hug, to kiss, to share space, to sit shoulder to shoulder, to be in the same space. And we carry that burden today, even as we gather. So even if all we do today is just be together and open our hearts a little bit to each other, that will be dayenu. That will be plenty. So let's connect and let's share some things. I'll start with what I have, some personal reflections, some teachings, and then I look forward to hearing from you what's going on with you. The other day, I went to the dry cleaners around the corner. I don't go often. I iron my own shirts typically, but I had quite a few, and I've been doing some funerals. And I went into the dry cleaners, and we were just making pleasant conversation. And I said, "How's business?" Just as you would say. And she said, "Not good." And then it hit me, well, of course, if you take a moment to think about dry cleaners, they're all hurting in their own way. Nobody's dressing up. There are no formal events. People aren't going to work. I went out and bought myself some more cargo shorts. Those are my dress clothes. So they're hurting. And then the next thing that made me think was, how many other areas of work and people are there that I haven't even given a moment's thought to, who are all hurting alone, that together the entire sector of society in ways that are not being heard. And that it's its own pain that we're not able to even be together to share what's going on, which is its own healing. So it's actually, when we scheduled this, I hadn't looked at the Hebrew calendar, but as many of you know, tonight is the evening of Tisha B'Av. You know, as the sky darkens and we turn to night, we begin the Jewish day of mourning. And just a word or two about Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. It culminates a 3-week mourning period. And pretty much all the Jewish holidays, many of them, Hanukkah, Purim, Passover, and so on, commemorate holidays that happened up until some 2,000 years ago, perhaps older. Since that time, people have felt free to institute days of celebration, anniversaries of deliverance, of family celebration. That's all on the plus side. But the unhappy things, the sadnesses, every single thing that's happened in the last 2,000 years, we do not create special days for that. All that history is put on this day, Tisha B'Av. It is the one day of mourning that carries all that sadness. It's the day that we set aside to feel what perhaps we need not feel at other times as we get on with our lives. Traditionally, it's a fast day, begins at nightfall and goes till tomorrow night. As a child, I used to fast. It was more traditional. I can tell you it's the hardest fast of all, much harder than Yom Kippur. It's longer, it's hotter, and by design, there is no program. So it really is a difficult day. There's no synagogue or anything going on. So this Tisha B'Av, you know, for most people, Tisha B'Av doesn't have resonance, and some people argue we shouldn't be marking Tisha B'Av in our day and age because we live such fortunate lives and so much of the past has been healed in our time. But every so often, an old ritual can have new resonance. And I'm thinking that this Tisha B'Av, the sadness that we carry because of the quarantine, because of death in our midst, because of sickness. I don't know about you, but I haven't really allowed myself to feel that. I'm too much of just getting through and muddling through and taking care of everything that needs to be taken care of normally and because of this time. But this is the time to allow ourselves to feel a little bit what's really going on. How we really feel in the face of our anxieties, which are justified, our sadness, which is justified, our sense of solidarity with others who carry heavier burdens than ourselves, either a part of our family or further afield. It's only natural that we would feel that and grieve together. So I don't know if you've had other opportunities. I certainly haven't. This is the first time I've had to be together and feel that together. And I invite you to enter this space for Tisha B'Av, as is appropriate, and to set that sacred space. Before we get into stories, I'd like to chant the traditional liturgy for Tisha B'Av, which is the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, who warned in advance of what was going to happen, and then mourned in retrospect for what had happened. So I'm going to chant from the first chapter of Eicha with its particular haunting melody for Tisha B'Av. And I invite you to close your eyes or just to go internally a little bit and just be with whatever is. Eicha yasheva v'adad ha'ira b'Sion ha'yesobo ki almono Rabosi v'goyim Sarosi b'medinois Oyesolomas בכל סבכי בלילה, ודמעוסו הלחיו, אין לך מנחם מכל אוהביהו. כל רעהו בגדו בו, היו לך לאויבים. גלסו יהודה מעוני ומרוב עבודו, היא ישבו בגויים, לא ימוצאו מעונויה. כל רודפיה השיגו בין המצרים, דרכי ציון אבלות, מבלי בואי מועד, כל שעריה שוממים, כהניה ננוחים, בסולוסיה נוגויס והימר לו. היו צוריה לראש, אויביה שלו, כי אדוני הגה על רוב פשעיה. אוי ללהו, הלכו שבי לפני צור, ויצא מבס ציון כל הדורות. היו שריה כיולים, וימוצאו מרעה, וילכו ולא יכוח לפני רוידי. זכרה ירושלים, ימי עוניה ומרודיה, כל מחמודיה, אשר היו מימי קדם. בנפול עמו ביד צור, ויהי עוזר לו, ראו הצורים, צוחקו על משפטיה. So that's a little bit of what is. This is real. What a strange time. But I want to reflect on our good fortune within this. Compared to some other countries, we are lucky that at no point in the last 5 months have religious services to honor those who have passed, funerals, have they been banned. Throughout this pandemic, people have been able to gather in person, to honor their family member, and to mourn together. And I've had the privilege and the honor to officiate in many services over the last 4 or 5 months. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about how that works later on. According to the governor, until the beginning of July, the rule was that only 10 people could gather at graveside. I wonder if having a Jewish governor of our state made the random number be 10, so there'll be a minyan. So we could say Kaddish. You have to pick some number, and that kind of made sense. So with the experts, but exactly 10, it's a minyan. At these services, I begin with chanting Psalm 23. And I want to do a little bit of text study of Psalm 23 because it's perhaps the best known of the 150 Psalms. And you know, the cadences of the King James can roll off our tongues. It's so familiar. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and so on. So I'm going to chant a little bit more to continue that feeling of sacred space through music. I'm going to chant Psalm 23 and then invite you to look at the translation with me. I'm going to offer 2 translations in the spirit of unpacking it a little bit. I'm going to chant the Hebrew, and the translation won't be available to you right now, but Paula will be signing it. She has the transliteration and translation. So you can follow her expressive expression if you read ASL, even if you don't, or you can just go more internally and listen to the Hebrew of the Tanakh of Psalm 23. Adonai roi lo echsar binot deshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot ינעלני. נפשי ישובב ישובב, ינחני במגלי צדק, ינחני במגלי צדק, למען שמו. עם כי ילך בגיא צל מוות, לא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. ערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, גישנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, כל ימי חיי. ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני רבי לא אחסר, Adonai roi lo echsar. You could have the next slide up. Psalm 23. One after that. Let's read this together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So if we can take that down, let's take that, thank you. So I'm going to start with a little quip because we're doing some heavy stuff, and a little joke that I actually tell at funerals and people laugh. The last line, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, which is such a familiar cadence that just rolls off the tongue. I like to say that after 4 months of being socially distanced at home, that's one prayer that's off my bucket list. I've been in a home forever. I don't want to be in anybody's house forever, not even the Lord's. I'm done with that one. That we can move, I think we can agree we can move beyond that one. I want to look at another translation of this, which is just as legitimate as the one we just read. And I want to thank my students at the seminary. When we studied this text, I think it was last year, some of them are online now, maybe they'll remember, it brought to the fore details that I hadn't thought about because you do it so quickly, you know, it just becomes familiar. And those of you who studied biblical Hebrew will know the term the Joseph, which is the aspirational tense. And this translation, which I provided here, is just as legitimate as the other one, although I haven't seen it in print anywhere. So if we could have the next slide up, and let's read this version of Psalm 23. So I'm sorry, the next, what after that? Oh, no, okay, so let's take that down. Okay, so I'm just gonna, if you can take that down, that's okay. Let's just take the slides down. Actually, this is better. I'm gonna read this, I have it here, I'm gonna read it. The Lord is my shepherd, I do not want. May he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. May he leadeth me beside the still waters. May he restoreth my soul. May he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, may I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, may they comfort me. May thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. May only goodness and mercy follow me all the days of my life, and may I dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Because it's a very different feel, right, to the whole text, right? This is, and what I want to suggest, as I said earlier, is that some days we wake up and we can declaim Psalm 23 as an affirmation, and other days, or maybe a funeral is one of those days, maybe this period is one of those times, the best we can do is to put that out there as an aspiration. It's not true right now, but we pray that it will be true in the future. So I want to, I'm cognizant of the time, and I've got so much I want to share as always. As a teacher, I always want to give more, but I'm going to respect the time because I want to hear what you're thinking about. I just want to comment on the title, which felt right a month or so ago when I put together the blurb, and feels a little less right now. And that's the idea of the quarantine as a Shabbat, as a time to set aside from the business of regular life. And in some ways, of course, it is like a Shabbat. There's less traffic, less business, less doing, and more being for many people, if not for all people, but certainly for many people, more of a Shabbat existence. But in other ways, it's very much unlike a Shabbat. Right? The first Shabbat in creation comes at the end of the 6 days of creation. And within the Shabbat is implied a return to creation with a baton handed to Eve and Adam following that first Shabbat. So Shabbat is time-bound, it's one day, it's between one work week and the next. As we say each Friday night in the Kiddush, God's spirit was restored. The intention of Shabbat is restorative, so that we can go back into the world like a good night's sleep, like any kind of break, like a vacation. But this period is not that. First of all, it's not time-bound, it's open-ended. Second of all, it doesn't feel so restful a lot of the time. And it doesn't necessarily imply going back right away to full work. So I would suggest that perhaps another metaphor for this period is the wilderness or the desert, going out into a certain emptiness, as the Israelites had to leave Egypt to go into their own wilderness to wander, but also the wilderness of the prophets, which is a wilderness of being cast out from God's presence, as understood traditionally, sin and punishment, although those are words that we use a bit more reluctantly nowadays. But the idea of being away from the comforts, the familiarity, the routine, life as we know and love it, being cast into the wilderness. And I hear from many people that sense of being cut off, of being in that wilderness, whatever that is. A friend tells me she's very much into the arts. She attends theater and dance. And she said, not being able to do that, she said, makes me feel less human. And that's quite a light burden compared to some of the sicknesses and burdens that people even on this call and further afield in our circle are carrying. But at the same time, the wilderness, as we know, is a place of promise. The wilderness is where Moses first heard God's call. And the wilderness is the place where the Israelites received the Torah. The wilderness is where the prophets heard God's voice. And in the silence of traffic and industry, the bird song is louder. We hear our own internal voice louder, the voice that perhaps we run away from, even as Jonah and the other prophets ran away from it. And we are forced to do some of that hard work, that welcome hard work, and other times perhaps we're just too busy to get to. So I want to share a personal story of that kind of slowing down that I had, which I don't think would have happened without this period. I've tried to slow down in the past during the work week. It didn't go so well. Not because of me, actually, or it might have been because of me if I'd gotten to that, but I didn't even get there. I remember on one occasion, I decided I'm just going to walk slower. I tend to talk fast and walk fast and do things fast. So I'm going to just intentionally go slower. And I think I'd start at my own property, in my own home, right? No one's going to be bothered by that. So I walked from the garage to my house, through my back garden, at half speed. It was going well until I got halfway through. Suddenly I hear a voice from my next door neighbor over the fence. A friend of my neighbor, who I never met before, called out. He said, "Why are you walking so slowly?" It just bugged him so much to see somebody going slower than the pace of life. And I had another experience when I was joining a friend at a restaurant for breakfast, the diner, and I did the same thing. I walked from the car to the diner slowly. First thing he said when I walked in, "What's up? Why are you walking slowly?" So I hope this resonates with you, the idea that we're kind of in lockstep of rushing around. And if we step out of that lockstep, others will catch us and point us or speed us up in that speed. That's been my experience previously. But then about a few weeks ago, I went shopping in one of the local grocery stores. And I was tired from something. I don't remember what it was. And I go into the store with my mask on, sanitize the handlebars of the shopping cart. And I decide to let myself go at the pace that my body felt, which was slow. And then something remarkable happened. I began to sense the presence of other people with their shopping carts in the supermarket. I'm not going to claim it was some kind of spiritual sensation, although there is that dimension. It was more I sensed who they were and how they were moving. And in particular, I noticed women of color, and I felt how they were moving around me. I think I was dressed somewhat formally. I'd come from a funeral, so I'm this white guy in a suit. And I noticed how they were avoiding me. And then if I slow down enough, I was able to get into this dance with them, this engaged, delicate dance of push, pull, without touching, of our shopping carts. This might sound silly, but it was very real for me. I sensed their presence. And then coming up to the milk refrigerator, there was this big guy on his phone, and I felt these waves of sort of strong energy emanating from him, and I sort of gave him a wide berth. I was almost like these women. And it was really rich. And suddenly I was let into this life, this sense of how they maneuver through space. That was my sense of it. It was such a strange experience, and the only person I trusted to share this with when I came home was my wife. And she immediately said, "Oh yeah, of course that's how it is." So, I had this sense of maybe as a guy, I was sort of being let in on a secret about how the other half can sometimes live or lives a lot. And since then, I've had touches of that experience, of that slowing down to get to the pace where I'm not sort of rushing through space, but being in connection with people and moving with them through space. That was my very sort of personal experience through that. Well, I have more to share, but I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for you. So I'm going to go to the last slide, and I'll work other things into the Q&A as they come up. We began with the beginning of Eicha, and if we go to I want to go to the end of Eicha, the end of Lamentations. These are the last two verses of the book of Eicha, and I want to look at it a little bit. You see, verse 21 is a beautiful, inspirational verse. Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days of old. You can see the Hebrew underneath. You might be familiar with this because it's such a beautiful text that the rabbis lifted that out and put it in key places in the liturgy. It's the last verse you hear when the Torah is returned to the ark. Ashivenu Adonai. And there's also some melodies for that you might be familiar. It's part of High Holy Days liturgy. It would be a great place to end. But if you look, verse 22 has a very different message. But thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us. And this is how the book ends. So when we chant the book, and many of my learned colleagues know this very well, we don't end on verse 22. We come back and repeat verse 21. So we should end on a high note, on something uplifting. And for me, this gap between the way the book is written and the way we read it is significant. And those of you who studied with me will have heard this before. The rabbis in the synagogue want to give us something to take home, something to lift our spirits, this message of Hashivenu. And that's why we end on that. We come back to that. And that's why it's in the liturgy. And that's why perhaps it's a familiar verse. But that introduces the question, then why do we have verse 22 at all? Why is that in the Tanakh? Making that question bigger, why are whole sections of the Tanakh there? The genocidal wars of Joshua, the whole sections of Tanakh that are not so familiar to me and are quite unfamiliar because they're not in the prayer book, they're not preached about, we don't study them, and perhaps rightly so. Why are they there in the Tanakh? What's their value if you don't never look at them and the rabbis sort of cut them out from what we focus our attention on? And I want to suggest that that is sacred scripture because sometimes the best we can do is to give voice to our pain or to the injustices in the world. Because so much of what goes on in the world and so much of what goes on within us is mute. We do not give voice to it, and we don't have the opportunities to connect, very much so at this time when we're so isolated and carrying so much individually that we don't really have those as much as we had before when we need it most. So perhaps sometimes the best we can do and the sufficient thing we can do is to give voice to that, to whatever's going on in the world, because these things happen in the world, and what's going on with us, because those things happen within us. At the same time, when we go to the synagogue, we lift up our spirits with the positive message. So I want to just reflect a little bit more on this penultimate verse, final verse, and then end with chanting it. That what I find comforting, and perhaps what tradition has found comforting in this, is that the way forward from the suffering and the grieving of Lamentations is actually the way back, is going back to where we were. And in grieving for the past is embedded the seed of healing for the future, because we affirm that which we're going to is what we left behind. In the grieving, We affirm that there is that place, the things that we cherish and we value, and we know what those are, and we can perhaps reflect on them more deeply at this time, and we know what we hold dear and precious, and we affirm that, and it's a going back rather than just trying to create it out of nothing. And I certainly at this time have felt the preciousness of life through its fragility, and try to fine-tune my senses a little bit more in this wilderness, in this sacred silence, which has been given to us against our will, but which carries blessings within it. So I'm going to end with chanting Hashivenu, and feel free to sing along. If you're familiar with it, you can come in, it's a round, and you can come in one of 6 places. So whatever time lag there is, thanks to Zoom, or wherever you happen to jump in, chances are it will create a sweet harmony with what I'm singing, and with everybody else, whether you can hear it or not. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai, Elecha, V'nashuva, V'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu kekedem. Ashivenu, Ashivenu, Adonai, Elecha, V'nashuva, V'nashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu kekedem. Thank you for your attention. I want to thank Tom Giller and Nancy Rothstein from the board for all the board support and for their work in putting this series together and for getting the seminary's message out, to Paula Blumberg for interpreting, for Rabbi Weisrob for initiating this, of course to Rabbi Goldhamer for the privilege of teaching the seminary for 10 years and for my own ordination at the seminary. And thank you to all the participants for giving of your time. And I'm curious to hear what's on your minds. Over to you, Nancy.
Well, one thing I do want to say is your chanting is exquisite. And the words that came to me is that it was comforting, enduring, and awakening. And the vibrational frequencies, I mean, I could almost cry now, just the comfort, the sensation of, for your ability to communicate it in that way through sound. It just, as you stopped in the grocery store, I stopped while you chanted. And there is such richness, there is so much there. And I may not understand Hebrew. I did become bat mitzvah, but believe me, I'd have a long way to go. Thank you for that, because it is in this slowness, it is in this wilderness that we start to notice leaves, trees, blades of grass that we never saw before. And so we did have a few questions that came up previously, and I'm sure you could entertain them all, but here we are on Zoom, and obviously it's let the seminary spread its tentacles, but what opportunities do you see for the seminary and for Jewish learning at large because of this situation? And even when the pandemic's over, this whole idea of meeting virtually like this.
So, and different people have had different experiences with Zoom. I have to tell you that the Passover Seder that I had with the extended family was very disappointing for me. Usually I go to family, I do very little work, and I get the entire family experience. Here the ratio was inverted. I had to do all the work, and it wasn't the same experience. But with teaching, I have found that it's worked fantastically well. I thought I'd have to cut down the lessons because of the, technology being slower. When I meet with families, I officiate at funerals, I find that when we talk on the phone, the conversations are shorter and not as rich as when we meet in person, which is why I try to meet in person. But I don't know, the teaching has worked very well on Zoom. And as we were talking before the call about this, this is a wonderful thing for a place like Hebrew Seminary. Hebrew Seminary is a real jewel in that it took a stand early on for the deaf and the hard of hearing. And it can get lost a little bit in the big power seminaries on the coasts in Cincinnati. And I think there's something wonderfully democratizing about Zoom. If you have a computer and a Wi-Fi connection, we're all boxes and windows. So it doesn't matter whether you're a multi-billion-dollar endowed institution or you're a little brave, plucky Hebrew seminary. In some ways, it levels the playing field and puts the onus on us to the quality of teaching. And now we have a potential audience of 7 billion people. So the way I've addressed that is that I invited one of our graduates, an old student who's now in Florida, to come back and study with us, to be less disconnected. So she's been attending some of our classes. And more specifically, I taught last year at Garrett Theological College at Northwestern and have opened up to teaching Christian seminarians as a rabbi. It was a very interesting experience. And the idea that I'm putting out there and talking to McCormick Seminary and others is having Christian seminarians and rabbinic students study biblical Hebrew together. It's a requirement for Christian students to, within the rabbinic tradition. And I'm going to make a strong plug. It's not going to be completely equally interfaith because we are such a tiny minority. And I think there's a lot of interest on the Christian side. I think it might add cachet to their CVs to say, we did our biblical Hebrew with the rabbis. So I've had some interest in that. And a lot of seminaries require biblical Hebrew, but don't have the resources to provide that. And if they're in a remote area, that's what Zoom is for. So I'm really curious to see what opportunities arise, particularly for us as a small seminary, thanks to Zoom.
Wonderful. You know, you were talking about Psalm 23 in terms of affirmation and aspiration. And I never heard that before. And it's such a, it was so powerful. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that distinction? Because it was pretty profound.
So I'm trying to think how I can do this without getting technical into my field of biblical Hebrew. Well, I'll go a little bit in. The Hebrew of the Bible is not as clear-cut. It's not as utilitarian as our language. It's poetic. It's rich. It has layers of meaning. We know this perhaps through the tradition of Midrash, of unpacking meaning. But the same text, as in poetry, you can unpack poetry, English poetry in many ways, but the actual grammar of the Hebrew Bible allows for reading certain voices and certain tenses as either statements of fact or as what we call the jussive, that may it be so. So, for instance, we know from creation, day one, let there be light. That could be read as this justice, may there be light, God saying, may there be light. It's a respectful tone to speak to God. When people entreat God, they don't say, do this, they say, may it be your will, right? The priestly benediction, may God bless you, right? Not God will bless you. So there is that ambiguity, which is respectful and open, but also allows for us to enter the text and engage however we are in that moment.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I will ponder this more. One of the rabbinical candidates asked, have you felt this experience during quarantine and during COVID has enhanced your passion as a rabbi?
Well, there's an assumption there, but that's an interesting question. Let me reflect on that a little bit. Well, I will speak personally that, I've been part of congregational life for, as you said, for some 20, 25 years. And I left congregational life just before all this began, at the end of January. Wow. As many know, congregations are shrinking. And as I said, kind of a little bit tongue-in-cheek in the bio I provided you, the unaffiliated are the largest Jewish
I saw that.
larger than all the others put together, which is usually not talked about or said with sadness. But my experience of stepping outside congregations into the unaffiliated, which is usually thought of within that world as stepping down, in some ways a stepping out into an openness. For instance, when I first started officiating at weddings and funerals for unaffiliated Jews almost exclusively, and I do a lot of it, I got a lot from people of, Rabbi, please, no God. Like, what do you mean, no God? I mean, why do you want a rabbi if you want no God? And why everybody seems to be reading from the same page. And I didn't get any more information beyond that to figure out what they meant by that. Clearly, there was something that hadn't been said. And I think over time, just by trial and error, seeing what stuck and what worked, I did do God and it was fine. So clearly it wasn't the surface meaning of that. I figured out that I think what people were saying was no pat readings, not some of the liturgy that is a little bit too clean and neat and tidy for an untidy situation. And that made me reflect on why did I never hear that when I was in congregational life? And my take on that is that, when you speak for an institution, people take whatever you give, and they either take it or they don't take it, and you don't really hear, right, that people don't feel empowered perhaps as much to come forward and say that. So stepping out into the congregation, into the maybe more vulnerable and just being me, I think allowed other people to show up as them, and has allowed for much richer conversations of give and take to really hear what's going on with them. And that's made my life as a rabbi much more interesting and richer. So in that sense, this kind of slowing down and feeling other people rather than just giving what I'm doing in the name of the institution, the denomination, theology, my training, is much richer, harder, but definitely worth it. And it's a good path for me.
So one of your colleagues, Rabbi Larry Edwards, said, "Thank you for the beautiful chanting." He liked the word enduring, and he said, "Endurance, we need that now. And the ancientness of the words of our texts is durable support." And he thought, wait, maybe you could comment on that.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Larry. I'm so glad you're here, and I always appreciate your insights and wisdom. I love that. Endurance and durable. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And then he said, and I don't know what this means, the Jussive, for those of you, the Jussive, God, may there be a God.
Oh, wow. I'll reflect on that too. Thank you for both those comments.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the other things that had come into play, the question was, and I think it's interesting because many of us have been on a Zoom funeral, but it said, how are weddings and funerals being performed under social isolation? You referenced it earlier.
Right.
But what are you noticing?
Right. So so until July 1, when you could just have a minyan for funerals, well, actually, there was a gradual changing of the rules. The first thing was they were all outdoors, and that sort of kicked in April when the weather was warming up, so that worked well. I don't know how that's going to happen in the winter, if we're still having to deal with this. But over time, it got more and more controlled, that people were told where to sit, or they would stand. People kept their distance, wore masks. And then the services were live streamed, which is why you were able to see them on Zoom. And all that really helped create a sense of safety because everybody knew where to stand. And if you're standing in front of the camera that was, 6 feet away, because I was singing, I would make sure people would double that distance, just to be on the safe side. And people didn't handle the shovels. There was just like little bags of dirt. So they were very thoughtful. The Jewish funeral homes were very thoughtful about how to minimize any kind of contact or movement. In some ways, there was a challenge because no matter how many times we prepped people and talked about that moment, it's such an emotional place that I found it again and again that the moment the funeral ended, the mourners would come forward for a hug. And it was as if their bodies were doing that, even though their minds knew they shouldn't. So we had these sort of very strange and difficult situations. Somebody would take a step towards me, and I would take a step back. And then they'll take another step towards me, I'll take another step back. But what could I do? We had to keep people safe. And then people realized, of course, and understood. Yeah, there was one instance where there was more than a minion at the funeral, and then some of the family members graciously agreed to stay by their cars, and they watched the funeral on their phones through the Zoom connection with the live streaming. It's been interesting in terms of, you know, I did a funeral last week where the two sons were out of state in Georgia and California, and I actually was putting my attention partly on the deceased brother who was sitting right there, and then, because it wasn't just people watching, they were actually the mourners. So it's something to learn how to sort of try to bring people in. I did a wedding a couple of weeks ago for an old bar mitzvah student. He'd been planning to get married for a long time, lovely kid, lovely bride. And they decided to go ahead because they're moving out of state. And they did it in the parents' backyard, and it was minimal people, you know, parents, one set of grandparents, sibling. It was all done very nicely. Dad ran the live stream for everybody who couldn't be there. But the funny thing came at the end when they wanted a group family picture. And I was the only non-family member. So the rabbi was the wedding photographer, and I was happy to do it. Everybody who was there. And then they took a picture of me too with them. So we're learning to navigate this new world.
Yes, we are. Well, I thank you so much for enlightening us today with your illuminations and your gorgeous, gorgeous voice. I think it took us places where we need to allow ourselves to be and find ways to go there. It's a strange time, and yet you helped us see some of the beauty in it. So we thank you for that. And if anybody has other questions, they can certainly send them to us, and we will look to you to provide responses. But thank you again for being with us this evening. It's a joy. So thank you.
So I want to say thank everyone, all the participants, for your attention. I'm honored that you were here. Yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation afterwards. So feel free to email me if you like at mdavis@rabbimichaeldavis.com, and look for announcements about biblical Hebrew for a broader audience, and for other programs that we'll be developing to get out into the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I wish you the best with your grocery shopping. It seems to be becoming a new experience. But I think the most mundane things we do, we are looking at differently. So thank you so much. And on behalf of Hebrew Seminary, we really want to thank you for joining us for the second of our Summer Spirituality series. Your insights have given each of us inspiration to spark hope, which we need, and find stillness. Ironically, I wrote that before, during these tumultuous times, and to connect to our spiritual compass, which is so much a part of Rabbi Goldhammer's teaching and healing, but to guide us in the moment and moving forward. And we're very grateful to you, Paula, who continues to sign as I speak, for your beautiful signing this evening. And to our listeners, we hope you'll participate in the two events to come. And this is recorded, so you can have your friends listen in to this, which I really think you should share this recording with them, included on the invitation you received. And we'll be resending things. We will be annoying you with more emails, so you keep up with these, with the series. And if you haven't already, please visit our website, HebrewSeminary.org, to learn more about us and to explore the seminary's offerings, courses available to you. You do not have to be a rabbinic student to audit some of the courses. And of course, we welcome your support so we can continue our important work educating rabbis as Jewish leaders and spiritual guides to serve the deaf community and all other communities. We wish you good health, we wish you peace, and we look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you so much for being with us.